was convicted in February of 2011, years after the murder. She stated in response to the Omnibus Crime Bill, "I wonder if we can afford to focus so many of our scarce resources on locking up the past so that there are only crumbs left for the living who are struggling to find hope for the future." On behalf of victims, she asked lawmakers to focus a greater portion of their prevention programs on policies that address the root causes of crime, support victims of crime, and help offenders reintegrate into society. So my final point is that prisons are not productive. They're rarely places where change occurs. Prisoners report boredom and frustration at best, and violence and abuse at worst. So there's been a number of high-profile cases that support this contention, and this is where I've done some original, or perhaps what we might call primary research. And so I made a point of looking for off-the-radar cases that are not high-profile, that I argue substantiate my point and the point of many others, that prisons don't promote transformation, and that transformation is underscored by the Canadian Criminal Code and the principles of sentencing that say rehabilitation is a central objective. And I personally argue, along with many others, that safety and security are better promoted by rehabilitation and by institutions that will be focused towards greater rehabilitation for those that need that, and most of the served in the community. So in order to prove my point or provide further evidence of my point, I went on two public databases. One is known as Quick Law, and the other is CanLII, so they're readily accessible. So I started to do my research over the last couple of days, and I will say that I had no problem finding cases of prisoner abuse, and I'm only going to highlight some of those that I found. And again, these are low profile, off the radar cases, and I haven't in any way attempted to do a quantitative study. It's largely qualitative in nature, but I argue that the readily available instances of violence and of power abuse reveal sufficient evidence to raise red flags about prisons and the values and behaviors they promote. So one of the themes that came up pretty regularly was the use of strip searches in holding cells. So if you're arrested and brought into a holding cell, you're typically strip searched, and that seems to be done very frequently. In a number of cases, people have argued that they didn't need to be strip searched, and so I'll highlight one. Linda Uten-Nair was arrested August 25th, 1995, and the case that I'll report from was heard in 2005. She was strip searched and placed in a cell. She actually doesn't object to being strip searched. She was transferred to a bullpen, a general holding cell, and sometime she started to complain about a headache, and she was hospitalized and then brought back to the bullpen. Uten-Nair was agitated and upset. She shouted, screamed, and demanded her release in a blanket. So she went to the hospital then, complaining of a headache, and then was brought back to the bullpen. Became agitated and distraught again. She resumed screaming and shouting, again demanded to be released from custody, threw things at the video camera in the cell, and requested a blanket. This continued for some time. No blanket was provided. So then she takes off her bra and kind of tests out the strength against the bars of the prison, and behaves as though she's contemplating suicide. Then she puts her bra back on. Then she's seen again on the video camera attempting to commit suicide. The police warned her not to block the video camera. After verbal exchanges, one of the officers grabbed her wrist and handcuffed it to the cell doors in line with the cameras. So she was naked and handcuffed to the bars of the cell for approximately 20 minutes. And following this, she attempted to bring an action against the police and was unsuccessful. So that's one of the cases I found. And she wasn't really arguing about the sexual, or the strip search, but she was strip searched. And I did find a fair number of other cases where people complained about being strip searched in the holding cells and argued that it wasn't necessary. And in fact, there were cases where the courts agreed and the person was cooperative. Okay, here's another case of sexual assault from Nunavut. Female complainant sexually assaulted while lodged in the holding cells after being arrested following a disturbance at a residence. Here are some of the facts. The accused and the complainant testified, so the accused is the guard, testified to a conversation during her first night in the remand cell about the suicide of her son, which resulted in the complainant, who's been sexually assaulted, becoming emotional and starting to cry. So both parties agreed that the accused opened the cell door as it massaged her shoulders, and then later, in the next few days, there was a sexual assault. The accused argued that the complainant consented to the sexual assault. So this is a person who's been arrested, taken into a holding cell, has a conversation with the guard about her son who's committed suicide, and he says she consented to the sexual assault. In cross-examination, the complainant admitted that she was lonely, upset, and confused when she was arrested, and she said that she was still grieving the loss of her son, and she broke down when the accused said he had met her son, but she denied consenting, and the court agreed with her. And this came to the light of day because she complained to her lawyer, who said she was extremely emotional, very upset. Initially, I began explaining the sentence, wondering if she was mad about the outcome because she was ultimately sentenced for the crime that brought her into jail for the first place, and she was crying. So I wanted to highlight that because there may be an argument, in fact it comes up in some of the later cases that I'm citing, that, oh well, you're dealing with people who are used to